clip, and let's move to you about your film Doel. You made a film about, almost a disappearing village in Belgium, and we all know why, because there's this plant that's growing.
No, it's the port of Antwerp that is expanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, I've seen some films about Doel because it's so fascinating. You see this village becoming more empty and isolated from the world, waiting for its death. It's almost someone on his deathbed, and he's not going to die. So there's still new breaths to come. And I was fascinated by the fact that you, as a Danish filmmaker, wanted to make a film about this topic. Why?
Well, that is kind of funny, but it's a coincidence. My ex-girlfriend lived in Antwerp 7 years ago, and I was visiting, and she was working, and I didn't know what to do. And I have a Belgian friend, and he asked me if I wanted to come for a ride, and he would show me this ghost town, and I had never heard about it. So we went on a car ride from Antwerp through this industrial area that's surrounding Antwerp, and that in itself was very fascinating to me because it's vast, it's huge. And at one point you see these two towers of the nuclear power plant, and I grew up in the 80s in Denmark where nuclear power was like something you really wanted to avoid because of Chernobyl and so on. So realizing that there was a small town just between, this industrial area and that power plant was in itself very it puzzled me, like why do people want to live here? And then entering the town and realizing that this used to be a place people would go on Sundays for, for leisure to go for a picnic or for lunch. And it used to have 2,000 inhabitants, and now there's 20 left. Really made me I want to figure out why people want to live here.
It's like an old gold town where the gold diggers have left in the last century. Yeah. Shall we have a look at the clip?
Sure.
Hier waren 24 cafés, daar zal ik al mee beginnen. En 3 bakkers.
Een gehatte veerboot.
En een slager. En een supermarktje.
De mensen komen nu naar Doel omdat ze denken dat het spookdorp is.
In Doel heb je nu momenteel nog 20 mensen. Dat zal dit jaar misschien wel wat veranderen.
You showed a very cinematic approach towards your subject with these long, still shots. Was the intention to isolate the village in that sense more from the reality? Why did you do that? Tell something about.
That was more like it was a combination of an aesthetic choice. I wanted to portray, maybe the abandonedness and the isolation of the town, but also there's it's a kind of a paradox. So you have a town which only has 20, 25 inhabitants left, and during the week nothing happens. It's very quiet, and on weekends they're being invaded by all kind of curious strangers, like urban explorers and people doing music videos and so on. So it was also to elaborate and emphasize on this contrast between this sort of dead town that they claim is a town, it's their home, and which is at the same time to the intruders, the strangers, is an amusement park. So we worked like also in the editing with this like these steady long shots where nothing happens, and sort of having the idea, at least I don't know if it worked, that the intruders would cut through the film just like they do in the town. So it was it was both like the paradox of that, but also an aesthetic choice.
But you're walking a thin line, because when you enter the village, it's funny in a way. It's a kind of a Las Vegas of loneliness, one could call it.
That's a nice way to put it.
And but that's a very thing. You show compassion to the people as well, because they're losing their hometown, their home village. So how do you do? When do you make a decision? Well, my film is going to move that towards that humoristic, or it will be quite serious, or how can you keep that balance?
Well, I think that there's a certain absurdity in the whole situation of Doel, and we wanted to work with that absurdity and saturate that a bit. But it was also something my editor added. He saw something in the material that I was maybe not aware of. To begin with, I had a little bit more of a cynical approach, a little bit more sort of depressive approach, like that this is really tough and it's gray and it's lonely. But I think it's also a question of that I like films that can both be funny and serious. I'm inspired by filmmakers that has the ability of, that something at one moment it's humorous and later on it gets more sincere. Yeah. And I think, I just like that kind of filmmaking. But I think it's also relevant in this case because it is a complex situation. Mm-hmm. These people, they claim it's their home. For them, it's deadly. It's dead serious. But at the same time, for the intruders, it's a, as you say, it's an amusement park. So we worked with that contrast, and I think that's why that it's both relevant to make it humorous and to make it serious or more. Yeah.
As we are dealing about architecture, which for some people is just information, or they say, I don't know anything about it. It's more an intellectual thing instead of an emotional thing. Where does it start with you all when you choose a subject? Is it about, hey, that's an interesting topic? Or is it about, hey, that moves me?
That depends. For me, I mean, it depends on whether I both work in fiction and documentary. And I don't think I'm necessarily interested in an overall subject. I get fascinated by a story or a location, and then later on I figure out, maybe it's related to other stories I've been telling, but I don't necessarily see it like that. I mean, I get fascinated by a character or a story or a feeling, a location, and then the rest comes later.
Yeah. In your case, for example, in Italy, the loss of social housing, I mean, this is such a big thing, and then you pick out the grapes, I would say, to tell that story. Or maybe you go back to your youth where you were living in the city and saw things happening.
It's kind of both. I don't know. It's something that concerns me also, but I think everything is some way autobiographical. So I think it's always both, because it's interesting that moves us also, and especially as a researcher. I mean, I see every movie as a research, even if then it could be really emotional or
and
carrying emotion for others. But maybe it's a deformation because I was a researcher, so I see everything as a research. So, but that's what moves us. Yeah. Also. It's not separated from...
It's not just sheets of paper or pieces of film, it's what moves you in the end.